China rolled tanks onto its streets ostensibly to protect banks, where people flocked for weeks to withdraw their money, but to no avail. Protests against the banks raged for weeks as depositors could not withdraw their savings from the institutions. Only a few received payouts, and most people were worried about frozen funds. They were feared that the banks would not be able to get their money back and that the authorities were trying to cover up the scandal. Protests have occurred sporadically since April until they become more frequent and widespread. Earlier this month, a large protest by depositors was suppressed by a mob of men in plainclothes, presumably by police. The protests intensified after depositors who were first told that their funds had been frozen because of the system update learned of reports of wrongdoing at the banks. The protest intensified after depositors who were first told that their funds had been frozen because of the system update learned of reports of wrongdoing at the banks. They were also secretly prevented from reaching Zhengzhou, the provincial capital of Henan, to participate in the protests. Depositors who had once visited Zhengzhou were barred from entering again because their COVID contamination status turned red. China used its COVID tracking technology to push back the protesters, the depositors claimed. The attempt to suppress the protests and even go so far as to use tanks against civilians shows that all is not well in the Chinese banking sector. China's real estate sector is already struggling with the default of several real estate developers on their loans. Homebuyers have also stopped repaying their loans, leading banks into a deeper crisis. The banks that have frozen funds are mostly in rural China. It was reported that these banks offered unsustainable interest rates to attract more customers, disregarding the country's economic downturn due to COVID crackdowns. Unrealistic profits attracted customers, but a possible downturn is in the economy left the banks without the funds to pay them back. Mortgage loan strikes are also destroying Chinese banks. These protests escalated in June and spanned 91 cities. Homebuyers have stopped paying their loans because of alleged corruption on the part of real estate developers, who say they are dividing funds meant for projects out of the country, leaving unfinished buildings and unfulfilled promises. Banks then begin selling properties before they are completed to keep the project on track. However, both homebuyers and developers have taken out loans from banks. For now, banks can recoup their value from assets pledged as collateral, but if this unsustainable practice becomes widespread, the banks could collapse.